What concerns me about sexuality in today's world, particularly in the dating app world, is that it feels like it's really gone off the rails. That almost to me, the dating apps feel like it's become a catalog for intimacy instead of catalog for a relationship. Is sexual intimacy healthy in a toxic relationship? To address that question, Dr. Lisha Antiqua joins me today to talk about sexuality and intimacy in healthy and unhealthy relationships. I'm so thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Lisha Antiqua. Thank you so much for being here. She has an interesting sort of mix. She's a social media content creator, which is how I came across her, but she also has a coaching mentorship program in soul psychology and an expert in sex and relationships, which is what we're going to dive into today. We're going to talk about what happens in a toxic relationship, what happens to the intimacy. So first of all, Dr. Lisha, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your expertise and how you got interested in this?
Thank you so much, Dr. Kerry. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, everybody listening. I hope that you get a lot out of this conversation, and feel free to message me on social media or at my website, info@lishaantiqua.com, if you have any questions about what we talk about. So a bit about me. I began my journey to end the cycle of abuse in my family when I was 18 months old. And I turned my stepdad in when I was 13. And that's when we actually got into the therapeutic methodologies and all of that. But I grew up very much around people that supported spirituality and more of what we now call the quantum world. And I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which is very proactive and sounds true and all that stuff. So when I was healing from being abused as a child, I was part of these communities that were doing breath work and doing things that were working more with the soul. So that's how soul psychology really came to be. Another big piece that happened was when I was 13, one of my last adolescent abusers, I was at the horse stables, the 40-year-old man saying, "Oh, I want you to be my girlfriend," and tried to kiss me. And I was kind of blocked in the stable. I hope this doesn't trigger anybody. And I ran out. Somehow I got out. I have no idea to this moment, to this day, how I got out of the stables. I ran to this place called Dry Lake. I was sitting there sobbing, and a figure, we'll call it God, appeared in front of me and said, "Go home and tell." And we'll be talking a lot about that today. That statement, "Go home and tell." I went home. I told my adopted dad. I like to really protect my biological father there. My adopted dad, what happened. He went and took care of, man's name was Al, and I'm just going to use it. He went and took care of Al. To this day, my mother and I have no idea what happened to Al, but we didn't see him again. And within a week, what my father had done to me, what that man had done to me, came out. And all the other experiences that I'd had since my childhood, that was generational abuse going back. And both sides of the family started talking about it. Both sides of the family started healing from this generational abuse. Both my stepfather's Oglala Lakota side and my mom's side of the family. And the healing started. So that's really where this all came from. I got cancer when I was 21. I wanted to be a naturopathic doctor because I just thought that was really cool. And somehow I ended up in psychology, and the rest is history.
It's been a long coming healing process. I can hear that this has been a journey for you. So often people, and this is a common thing that I hear when I meet people who are in an abusive relationship, don't realize that the abuse does not just go beyond what's happening to their day-to-day life. It's not just the coercive control, but there's also forms of sexual abuse, but we often don't recognize it as sexual abuse. So first of all, let's help broaden that definition so people kind of realize what are the boundaries of healthy sexual interactions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all different. So I want everybody to know, sex really shows up in 100 different ways. Everybody has a sexual identity, and intimacy is intimacy. So oftentimes when we're in an abusive relationship, what you're going to find first is that intimacy is not seen. Your personhood is discounted, taken away, or stolen. Now that could be in the bedroom. It could be out of the bedroom, and it's still sexual abuse if that's your main person you're having sex with. Now, sexual abuse is cheating on you. We don't think about that as sexual abuse, but it definitely is sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is withholding sex from you as a punishment. right? Women do this to men more often than women historically, but it's sexual abuse. Sexual abuse obviously is coercion. I think we're talking about that more, but it's very misunderstood. Coercion when they're pressuring you into it. And this is kind of the opposite. Well, I don't want to give it to you. And then they react to coercion. So it's not that you can't say no. This is really important to understand. That's not what I'm saying at all. We get to say no. It needs to be safe to say no, I'm not in the mood, and not be met with coercion. And also not have sex be, I'm not going to give it to you. I'm saying no to punish you. Those are two very, very different things. So it's really about that intention. The other thing that happens often, and I work with and help a lot of survivors of sexual abuse. I do a lot of trainings and work with people that are working with people now, but I still do have a small practice where I work with people on a coaching level that have experienced sexual abuse that are reclaiming their identity. And oftentimes when it comes to sex, what we don't talk about in therapy, the big gap that I found in therapy is we don't talk about finding your own likes, your own dislikes. And if you were sexually abused as a child, then that's taken away from you before you even got started. So going back and relearning how you like it and what you like and why you like things and really cleaning out any shame or guilt is also really important. So then that can't be used against you, because shame and guilt and fear are usually what's used against people when they're in an abusive relationship.
So what I hear you saying, and I love the way that you use the word intimacy to say into me you see. I love that. It's that I'm struggling with even saying this, but that sexual abuse, I mean, because the word abuse to me feels really strong, but sexual dysfunction starts to happen when two people don't show up as two full people in this relationship. Either it's transactional, or it's scripted, or it's coercive, or it's not consensual and mutual. I guess I would also expand that as well, as where something's happening to somebody outside of their control or maybe their comfort zone, or if they're being forced into it. Do you think people recognize that aspect of the relationship is dysfunctional?
No, I don't think so. Oftentimes, if you're raised in an abusive environment and sex was part of that abusive environment, then it's really hard to recognize the abuse because it's always been transactional. You've always been objectified. In my dissertation, I called it object identity disorder. And you have borderline and narcissistic tendencies in that disorder, but really it's you just trying to say, look, I'm human, I have a choice, but not feeling it and not believing it and not having that solid ground to stand on because you are always objectified. Now, this could be a slave mentality as well. So we do it for safety. We do it for security, right? We do it because the Bible says that we have to submit to our man. We do it because it's the right thing to do, or we don't do it because of all of those same reasons, right? It can go both ways, which makes it very, very confusing for people. So I really separate to what we look at as normal is not normal. When it comes to sex or any relationship, I think normal is not the goal. Healthy is the goal. And we can be healthy. Yeah, right? Normal is whatever we experienced. So for me growing up, right?
Yeah, normal is familiar, you know?
Yeah, normal is familiar. So if you're seeking out normal and you're leaning into normal and you want a normal relationship, you're in one. Like that's the first thing to realize. I'm in a normal relationship. This is the toleration that I'm having. This is the level of toleration I'm having. For a lot of survivors of abuse that have been in this situation before, we had a high, too high level acceptance, right?
Yeah.
And we have compassion for people. Oh, I understand that, right? And then you might have some guilt. So for sexual abuse survivors, not always, but I would say 90% of the time, you're one way or the other, either hyper or hypo. And you might fluctuate in a relationship. But if you're in your hyper space of normal, then you might want it 2 or 3 times a day. And that's fun and that's it. And a lot of times this is how we get with the narcissist because that love bombing is happening at the beginning of a relationship. And we just fall right into it because we have a high level of sexuality. And then at the same time, that's our normal. At the same time, then the guilt, then the brainwashing, then the isolation, then you're not good enough. Then the cross triangulation starts happening, mainly with the church is what I hear often, right? Oh, well, you wouldn't be doing this if you were this, or you're cheating on me when you're not, right? Because you don't have sex as much or something. These things start happening, and then the guilt and the shame take over. And then you go into the hypo, which is, I don't want to do it. I'm not feeling it. Creepy crawlies, the flashbacks, the not good enoughs, right? The I'm objectifying, I have to's come in. And all of that blocks us from actually facing it because we feel like we're wrong either way. And so that's what I like to help people realize. Like, you're not wrong either way. And to recognize what you want sexually and be able to ask for that is healthy. To recognize what's going to hurt somebody. And if that's something that you're into, you need help, right?
Right. Do you think that toxic personality types, and I'm thinking of the cluster B particularly, have approached intimacy in a kind of a unique way, or even maybe a sort of standardized way? Is that a fair assessment to say? And if so, what do you think it looks like?
Well, the cluster Bs don't have an into me to see.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole point. So the narcissist will look at their partner and they'll be like, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z to please me and do it this particular way because it's about me. Not because it's about them, but because the reflection of the person they're with, they think is them, right? Mm-hmm. And then we'll just go to the other side. We're not going to go into the big S's and the big H's, like outer realms there. Stay with the borderline, right? But we'll go to the borderline side and they're like, I need to do this to make you happy. I need to do this to do this. It's all about the other person. It has nothing to do with them. It's all about, I need to have sex 10 times a day so you're happy. I need to do this so you feel loved. I need to do this, right? And they have no consideration for themselves at all, right? And so neither of those aspects are healthy. Neither of them are the end to me to see. Both need an end to me to see and an opinion on their sexual hunger, their likes and their dislikes, their erotic blueprints, their awakening to their own sensual and sexual desires. And then that safe space to play in that without shame, without guilt. That's where healing happens.
I've noticed that cluster Bs tend to rush sexual intimacy. And I think part of it is because they're taking advantage of the rapid connection, rapid building of a bond so that you feel like there's something here. It's almost a form of pseudo intimacy. Is that something you also have seen, or do you have a different opinion on that?
I agree with you 100%. Yeah, we rush into it. And one is because we want to feel that intimacy. Two, I think a big thing that I find in my clients, and I definitely experienced this myself, I was never diagnosed with a cluster B, but I definitely been in narcissistic relationships and I have CPTSD for sure, which is quite similar. And I also had hypersexuality and as a way of expression and didn't know how to tell my body no, and then would get terrified when I wanted to say no because I was scared of the punishment I would have gotten as a child. And so with that, I kind of can relate to this myself too. And I just want to be open and vulnerable in that way with the audience. But what happens is we rush into sex because we don't want to be rejected. Right? We don't want to be rejected. We want to be fun. We want to be liked. We want to be loved. And so more so, especially I think with the cluster Bs, the narcissists want to be chosen and they want to conquer, right? They want to conquer and they want to like, you're mine.
Yeah.
And they
think dominate
sex
would be. Yeah.
Dominate. Yeah. That's what sex looks like. And for the cluster B, it's more like, I want you to love me, or the borderline. It's like, I want you to love me. I want you to choose me. Like, finally, somebody's here for me. Finally, somebody's going to see how wonderful I am. And we use sex in order to do that.
Yeah. And I would say the psychopath uses sex to manipulate. Mm-hmm. And the histrionic uses sex to sort of act out. Mm-hmm. You know, look at me. Aren't I really wonderful? And aren't I so beautiful? So that's how I would see them all doing that. What concerns me about sexuality in today's world, particularly in the dating app world, is that it feels like it's really gone off the rails. That almost to me, the dating apps feel like it's become a catalog. It's some people, not everybody, but some people are viewing it as a catalog for intimacy instead of catalog for a relationship. And I even use the word intimacy bothers me because it's really not intimacy. It's actually a catalog for transaction instead of a catalog for a relationship.
Yeah.
But what I get afraid of is that we're building a culture of people who don't know what intimacy is. They've actually never experienced it. They've just experienced transactional connection that's very objectifying. How can someone recognize if that's happening to them? Say that you're a newbie to this, you're a novice, you're not very experienced. How can you recognize that this person is approaching something from a transactional perspective versus a healthier perspective?
I think the first thing is on those first couple dates, like really watch. Are they comfortable with you asking questions about what you're looking for in a partner in a relationship? And understand that the relationship is you, them, and the relationship, right? And in the first couple dates, there's a you and there's a them. If you're not allowed to talk about what you each want in a relationship without making it about your relationship.
You're saying not making it personal.
Not making
just a state of a relationship. In a state of relationship, I want this.
And they start making it personal, or they have reactions to it, or they try to woo you in with, oh, we could do this and we could do that. That's when I would take a step back, in all honesty. And I'm talking about the first or second date.
Right.
Because that means that they're looking for somebody to complete them rather than coming to a relationship complete. The other thing that I would say about dating is going in and really understanding, knowing for yourself what you want in a relationship, why you're dating, and what your standards are. If you don't know your own standards in dating, if you don't know your own standards for yourself, because one, you haven't been allowed to have any, right? You haven't looked into the intimacy to see into yourself to say, well, what am I willing to tolerate? What am I willing to live with? What am I willing not to live with? Then you're going to let anybody walk all over you and you'll be easily manipulated. When you go in there with that, willing to let the person go. And I would say the first year and a half, be absolutely willing to look at 1, 2, 3 habits and be like, I'm out. This is not a perfection thing because we're all going to get mad. We're all going to have a bad day. If somebody's expecting you never to get mad, never have a bad day, and always look a certain way, like that's your red flag right there. Also, if a man or a woman goes into asking for sexual favors or doing those things before you're even meeting up, know that it's going to be a transaction.
Yeah, that hypersexualization of the person, even before, like essentially, you can't even fill out a short note on that individual. You don't know anything about the individual, and they're already moving to something that's highly personal. To me, that's like, whoa, something's really wrong.
And it's okay. Like, here's another perspective. Okay. I'm just going to throw this perspective out there. If you're being transactional and that's maybe a turn on for you, right? Like you're online, you kind of know that you're just trying to have fun. Like it's a transaction and you want to play with the person like that. Be honest.
Exactly. That's what I think. People say, right. Say, I'm looking for casual,
Yeah. And some people are. And if that's the case, great. But don't go into somebody's DMs that says, I don't want anything casual, and try to talk them into something casual because you think they're cute or hot, because that's objectifying.
So let's get real practical for a second. Signs of objectification are what? Because I think we often talk about it sort of at the abstract realm, but I don't think people know what it looks like when it's actually happening. I mean, I think back to my relationship with that toxic partner, and I can see where it is now. But at the time, I missed it and took it like, oh, he really likes me. He thinks I'm so attractive. And now I look back and think, oh, no, that's not what was happening at all. So when you're rather naive or inexperienced, or maybe you just haven't had a broader experience, what should you be looking for that will say this is going to be objectifying?
If it is all about your body. Okay, so that's the easiest one. That's the first one. It's all about the body. Oh, your picture's so cute. This is so hot. That's so hot. That is all about the object that you are. And the one true object that we have is our physicality. So there's that. 2, when things just need to be just so. We were talking on my radio show, More Than Sex and Secrets, if you want to listen to Dr. Kerry on it. And we were talking about hanging the hangers up, right? Things just have to be just so. That means you're not your own person. You're an object of their identity. So that's a narcissistic view. if they take responsibility for your emotions. And this one is overlooked so much, but that's the opposite. You're getting into a relationship with a borderline, right? If they're like, oh, it was my fault. I did it. Oh, you feel sad. Oh, it's all about, right? If they make all of that about them. Oh, you couldn't show up on time. Oh, it was my fault. I'm so sorry. I miscommunicated. No, clearly you didn't miscommunicate. Like everybody knew everyone was supposed to be there at 7. That person shows up at 7:15 and you're like, oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So that person that's over apologetic, that's going to be transactional too. The transaction looking a little bit different, but you're going to be filling their cup. If you show up, that means they're worthy. If you don't show up, that means that they're not worthy.
Here's one of them I thought of, and that is a person who doesn't really allow you to engage with them in the way that they're engaging with you. I could tell really early on that I was not to touch him, especially his head or his hair. So I felt like I was picking up the rules really fast. It felt like he has a lot of liberties and I have very few. There wasn't this freedom.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Beautiful. So you were the object to serve him his way.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
His way. And if it wasn't his way, then there was a consequence. And that brings us to rules, which I think is very important to understand that rules are not boundaries. I'm sure you talk about this a lot, but rules are not boundaries, you guys. Rules are punished by somebody, and the person being punished goes to jail. They pay a fine. They have to do their chores. They have a timeout, right? Children have rules, and we have laws that are our rules. That in relationship, there should be absolutely no rules.
I've never talked about that. So why don't you define the difference between boundaries and rules? Because that's a new concept.
Cool. I love this. This is one of my favorite topics because it's so important for us to understand. So oftentimes when you grow up in abuse or you grow up objectified, you know how to follow the rules and you know how to rebel against the rules. And no matter which side of the coin that you live on, it's about rules and punishment, or rules and consequences, rules and consequences. And the other person is in charge, right? So if you're driving down the street and you break the rule and you're speeding, the cop comes, gives you a ticket, the courts come and you have to pay the fine or go to the thing. That's external rules, right? That's a rule. Boundary has nothing to do with the other. The boundary is set by you and withheld by you. So somebody can't cross your boundaries. You can allow them to cross your boundaries, which would be self-betrayal, which is painful and hurtful and hard to heal, right? But oftentimes we expect boundaries to be rules.
Yes.
And for somebody, including ourselves, to then punish him or her for crossing that boundary.
Yeah.
And that is elementary. That's elementary and that's legal. And that's not a relationship. A boundary is when somebody says, I don't want you to come into the kitchen when I'm cooking because it gives me anxiety because when I was a kid, I was abused in the kitchen. Okay. This is just my own personal example. I would tense up. My neck would start going like this. I mean, it was the weirdest thing. And I was like, just don't come into the kitchen. Right. And I asked and my narcissist didn't care. Come up, come behind me. Right. Do the same thing as my dad. I'd be flinching. I'd be like, right. And then I'd be guilty for having that reaction. And then it'd be this whole thing and dinner was ruined and it was my fault because I was too sensitive. So I was like, okay, I'm going to learn about boundaries. The boundary was don't come into the kitchen. And then he'd come into the kitchen and then I'd get mad at him and we'd have a fight, right? That was a rule. So if he came into the kitchen, one, I got permission to flinch, hit, punch, bite, whatever I needed to do to get out of that PTSD response. So my body wasn't regurgitating that PTSD response. So I don't have that reaction anymore. I healed my PTSD. So every time that he came into the kitchen, the boundary was, if you come into the kitchen, you know that if you trigger me, I'm going to react as my nervous system wants to react so I can heal this response because I'm no longer going to carry this PTSD and shove it down and pretend like it's not happening.
Right.
So that was one. So that started happening. Two, after that kind of went for a bit and I was like, I don't like that. I don't have any reactions anymore. For some reason, I'm not reacting anymore. My body worked that out, right? Then I was like, well, if you come in, that means you want to cook dinner and I'm going to leave.
Right. Yeah. Because that's what I was thinking of too. It's like, for example, I can't stand peas. I hate them. Rule could be there's no peas allowed in the house. That's the rule. But another way to approach it is if you put peas in the food, I'm not eating it. That's a boundary. You know,
that's a boundary because you're in charge of it.
I'm in charge of myself. I'm not making a rule for the house, but I'm protecting myself and my integrity. Yeah. So this has been really fascinating. I can tell you and I could talk forever, and there's so many different directions I'd love to take this. Before we talk about where to find you, because I want to do that next. But in the podcast extra, we brought up earlier withholding, coercion and withholding, which is almost like two sides of a coin. And I would love to talk about when is a no abuse and when is no just a boundary. But how can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
Fantastic. So I do work with some clients really with identity and identity therapy. The program is called Amazing You. And then I have another one called Reclaim Intimacy, where you can find the intimacy, reclaim your sensuality and sexuality after going through abuse and that relationship abuse. So you can enter into a really beautiful boundary setting, fantastic dating life, right? So all of that's at my website, lishaantiqua.com. So LishaAntiqua.com. And then if you're interested in learning more about helping people, adding this to your practice, becoming a coach, learning about identity therapy and how the soul, the consciousness of a person really reacts to trauma so you can help people stand in their power, please check out yourownuniversity.com, where we have school and trainings and things like that.
Oh, that's rich. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Dr. Lisha. And I'm excited to talk about coercion on the podcast extra.
Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? You can find me at Kerry McAvoy, PhD. Or you can learn more about me and my resources, such as the Toxic Free Relationship Club at kerrymcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.